Okay, Jojo, I think we're all set here.
Yeah, they're all labeled?
They're labeled, numbered, and I've got the first one in there all set to go.
Good.
Welcome to Home Time. I'm Dean Johnson. The subject of this program is flower gardening.
I'm Joanne Liebler. We'll show you how to lay out a flower bed, how to prepare the soil, how to plant the flowers, and keep them growing all summer long.
We've included a project guide along with a videotape. In that project guide, you'll find a tape reference. We recommend that you mark down your VCR counter number at each section to make those spots easier to find.
The sections go in chronological order because that's how you garden. And we'll take you from the late winter planting through the spring, summer, and autumn. It's all here, so we'll show you right after this.
Home Time is made possible by Chevy Truck, who brings you Chevy full-size pickups. Today's big pickups for professionals and do-it-yourselfers. Chevy S10 pickups, today's compact pickups that play as hard as they work. Chevy S10 Blazer, today's sport utility vehicle in 2- or 4-wheel drive. Chevy Astro, today's compact van with 2-wheel drive and new all-wheel drive models. Nobody's winning like the heartbeat of America. Today's truck is Chevrolet.
The National Home Time PBS series is brought to you weekly by Chevy Truck in conjunction with the Stanley Works. Thanks for buying this videotape.
We hope after watching it, you'll agree that it contains a lot of helpful information for whatever home improvement project you're planning.
We also hope you realize that neither the Home Time Video Library nor the PBS series would be possible without the continued generous support of Chevy Truck.
Without Chevy's underwriting, this tape might cost substantially more.
So thanks to you for watching, and thanks to Chevy Truck.
Okay, you ready?
Yep, all set.
All right.
Oh, look at all that snow. That's the day we took all the measurements, wasn't it?
Right, that was right after that blizzard in March.
Yeah. Say, there's still a lot of snow out here.
Well, even though there's still snow on the ground, it's not too early to start thinking about flower gardens.
Now's a good time to make some crucial decisions. For instance, if this is your first garden, where do you locate your flower beds?
And now is a good time to decide what the beds will look like by planning the flower layout according to their color, to their height, and to their time of bloom.
You know, I guess this would be a pretty good spot for a bed. It's just hard to imagine what it's going to look like with all this snow.
I know. It's hard to believe that this snowy mess will produce a colorful garden in just a few months.
Well, that's why we got to get working on it now. Here, let's get some measurements.
Alrighty.
The measurements told us we had about 2,500 feet to work with in the backyard. We already had a shrub bed along the west side, that's at the top of the screen there, and a short hedge along the north side, that's on the right.
We decided to leave those shrubs as they were and put our two main beds in front of them. We figured a curving edge on the west bed to enhance the rounded edges of the shrub bed. The annuals and perennials will go here. And we planned a rose bed in front of the north hedge to create another rounded bed there.
Later, after we'd thawed out, we made a detailed sketch of our yard on graph paper. We finalized the shapes of our new gardens, and we started to think about what specific flowers we'd be planting. More on that later. Okay, now we can skip ahead a bit to when we got a little more serious about our yard work.
This is after all the snow was gone. It was time to lay out the beds and prepare the soil.
There's nothing wrong with the landscaping in our backyard. In fact, the layout's quite nice. But after these tulips die out in the north bed, the only color back here will be green. Some flowers will brighten that up.
You can start working on the beds as soon as the ground's dry after the spring thaw. If it's still a little bit muddy, it's best to wait. Now, if you don't know when to start, you can check with your local nurseries or garden clubs. The first step is laying out the flower beds according to plan. A garden hose helps with the curved edges. It's heavy enough to hold a pattern, but easy enough to adjust if you need to. When you're happy with the pattern, start skimming off the sod inside the borders of the bed. You can run a sod cutter like this to make the job easier. But don't take off too much soil. Just skim off the grass.
With the grass gone, you can get your first good look at the soil underneath. Now, it may just seem like dirt to you, but it's one of the most critical factors in a successful garden. Soil is the growing medium for your flowers, and when it's right, it gives them easy access to nutrients, air, and water. I'm collecting enough soil now to get a test run on it.
You'll want to know what makes up your soil so you can prevent problems. For instance, you'll have poor drainage with clay soil. Its tiny particles bind together when wet and keep water from draining properly. Sandy soils are just the opposite. They consist of larger particles which create a porous mix and allow water to drain through too quickly. The ideal grow soil is a combination of large and small particles known as loam. It holds water long enough for thirsty plants while safely draining away the excess. Ironically, it's the same solution for either sandy or clay soils. We want to add what are called soil amendments, things like peat moss, compost, or manure. They help to thicken up sandy soils and thin out clay. Grab this one out here.
A soil testing lab will tell you what kind of soil you have, but here's a simple test that'll give you some idea. When it's damp, loam will form a lump when you squeeze it, and it'll crumble easily into small clumps. Wet clay forms a hard ball that won't break up, and wet sand won't form a lump at all. Our soil is loam, so we don't need to doctor its physical texture much at all. However, garden soil always appreciates organic amendments, so we're going to put down a layer of peat moss and manure.
Roots have trouble penetrating hard, compacted soil, but organic amendments help keep the soil from getting to that state. You do have to work the amendments in, though, which we'll get to in a little while.
A soil test will also give you the pH level, which indicates the amount of acid in the soil. Some plants need high amounts of acid, while others need more alkaline soil. Our soil's fine, but if it were too acidic, we could add lime to balance it out. If it needed more acidity, we could add aluminum sulfate.
We do need to add a little fertilizer to bring our soil nutrients up to par. Our soil test showed us that we're fine on phosphorus, but we're a little low on nitrogen and potassium. This is a 10-10-10 fertilizer. That means it's 10% nitrogen, 10% phosphorus, and 10% potassium. So every 10 pounds of it puts a pound of each element in the soil. Be sure to follow package directions on how much you spread. For soil testing, you should be able to find a lab in your area to do the testing for a nominal fee. Your local nursery can help steer you in the right direction. Or you could buy a kit and do the chemistry yourself.
And a word about fertilizer. It comes in organic and inorganic forms. Inorganic fertilizers are produced chemically, and organic fertilizers are made out of natural products like bone meal. Now, they both provide the necessary nutrients for your plants, so which way you go is really up to you. We used a little bit of both, and now onto some digging.
Plants grow best when the soil is well cultivated. That means breaking it up, turning it over, and mixing it together with all the things we've already added to it.
We're doing the first part by hand, using shovels to turn the soil over and mix in our amendments.
You just dig up a clod of dirt and flop it over. This first step gets the amendments under the surface where it'll do the most good. The fertilizer will help the plant's chemical structure. The peat moss and manure will keep the soil loose enough for root growth, air penetration, and water drainage. In an older garden, you could go down another layer to really stir up the used soil. That's called double digging.
Once the soil's been turned over, you want to mix it up to be as fluffy as possible, and that's where the tiller does a great job.
We're using a 20-pound gas-powered mini-tiller. You walk backwards with this particular rig, letting the tines dig into the soil.
You could do this part of the cultivating by hand, with a hoe or a rake, but the tiller mixes the soil and amendments well, trapping enough air inside to raise the soil height above the rest of the lawn. That means the flower roots will grow more easily.
After cultivating all the beds, we apply some finishing touches. Well, like raking the soil smooth and using a flat-nosed spade to cut a border on the edge of the beds. There we go. We're going to clean up our act by giving our new Chevy S10 pickup a wash it's really earned.
This is an S10 Maxi Cab with four-wheel drive. It's a new truck, but it's going to get dirty when you use one as much as we do. And here we go. This truck's been everywhere today. It really needs this wash.
A Chevy S10 is one of the hardest working compact pickups you can buy. An all-round helper for any major do-it-yourself job. We use ours for everything from running simple errands to hauling big loads like this fill dirt for landscaping.
It's easy to see that an S10 pickup is built for a long life. The cargo box is smooth inside because it's all welded. You won't find any exposed mounting bolts here to trap water and cause rust.
This Chevy is fun to drive, too, especially in four-wheel drive with the standard InstaTrack system. InstaTrack lets you shift on the fly from two-wheel drive into four-wheel drive high and back again at any speed. You don't have to stop or even slow down.
Soap and water, that's all our good-looking S10 needed to shine again. And underneath those aerodynamic lines is a 4.3-liter Vortec V6 that's standard on four-wheel drive S10 pickups like this one.
The popular Vortec V6 has 160 horsepower for some real towing muscle. Properly equipped with the Vortec V6 and other required equipment, a four-wheel drive S10 pickup can tow up to 5,500 pounds. That includes trailer, cargo, and passengers. A two-wheel drive model can tow up to 6,000 pounds, 3 tons.
To help you make stable, smooth stops, there's a standard rear-wheel anti-lock brake system. On four-wheel drive models, the anti-lock feature operates only in two-wheel drive.
An S10 Maxi Cab has the added room of a stretched cab. With optional rear jump seats and required front buckets, it can carry 4 adults. Or you can fold up the rear seats for extra cargo space.
Well, it's all clean now. Ready to go back to work and get dirty again.
That's the way it goes with a truck that does so much.
Chevy S10 pickup is another reason today's truck is Chevrolet.
And why nobody's winning like the heartbeat of America.
Hey, it looks like you're all set there.
Yeah, I think this is as tilled as it has to be.
Great, let's get these flowers in.
Okay, here, I'll help you out. Say, aren't we getting ahead of ourselves here?
I think you're right.
There you go, stop it here. Before we go any further, we want to talk to you about how you go about selecting the flowers that will go in the beds.
That makes sense. This part of the gardening can be both fun and frustrating. It's fun because you get to decide what goes where, but it's frustrating because there's so many choices. So it really helps to know a little bit about the different varieties of flowers that are available. For that, we went to a nursery. And there we are. When the gardens are ready for planting, the nurseries fill with colorful flower transplants. They're started from seed indoors, and then they're sold as a convenience to gardeners who can then transplant them into their own flower beds.
Transplants will save you time, but they cost more than seeds. If you buy an impulse without any research or a plan, you could end up wasting money. Your best bet is to learn as much about flowers as you can, set some definite goals, and then choose those flowers that look best in your garden situation.
The goals are up to you, but let's take a look at the factors that go into your gardening decisions. And we'll start with the 3 categories of flowers: annuals, perennials, and bulbs. As the name implies, annuals, like these marigolds, survive only one season, and you have to replant them every spring. But that means you can vary the layouts from year to year. Chrysanthemums are one of the perennials, which grow back year after year. It's convenient, but the pattern won't change. Bulb flowers, like tulips, also return every year, but they don't come from seeds like annuals and perennials. They emerge from thick bulbs which store the plant's food. They lie dormant in the winter and bloom in the spring, bringing the first color. Gardening guides and catalogs will let you know whether a flower's an annual, a perennial, or a bulb, and it's something to think about. Well, for instance, you might want to go with annuals in your beds where you like to rearrange things from year to year, whereas you might want to put perennials in the beds where you like things constant over the years.
Climate's also an important factor, since flowers react differently to heat and cold. What's interesting is some flowers grown as perennials in southern climates many times are treated as annuals in colder climates because they die during the winter. They're categorized by the zones set out in the Plant Hardiness Zone Map. The map links 10 regions with similar weather. The higher zone numbers indicate milder climates. We're in Zone 4, so it's too cold for many flowers, but just right for those that hate long, hot summers. If you don't take your local weather into account, you could have some problems. Experts at your local nurseries or garden clubs can help make the right choices for your zone.
And different flowers have different needs for sun and shade, so you'll need to consider the light patterns in your yard. And remember, the house and trees and tall shrubs will all cast shadows. Most annuals, like this orange celosia, do best in full sun, so keep them out of the shady areas. But dianthus does well in light shade. Full shade is tougher, but a few annuals and many perennials thrive in areas that get little sun. We'll talk about those as we plant our flowers.
Sun, climate, lifespan. Those factors are all crucial to garden planning, and you want to take them all into consideration when you choose your flowers at the nursery. Well, let's change videotapes now so we can take a look at some other important factors. What really determines your garden's appearance is, well, obviously the color of flowers you're using and how you arrange those in your garden. This is pretty much a matter of personal taste, but there are some general guidelines to follow.
Well, for instance, mass plantings in a single color can be very attractive, and I'll show you what I mean in this video. Look at these pink petunias at one of the gardens we visited last summer. Planted in mass and close together, they're quite attractive. Of course, multicolored varieties of the same flower, like these snapdragons, is another option for gardeners. And masses of different flowers in the same bed can be breathtaking, as in this bed, dominated by orange zinnias and yellow marigolds. Sometimes, though, a single flower standing alone in one corner of the bed makes a more striking display. This is a daylily.
Colors are crucial to a garden's look, but there are other things to consider, like a flower's height, for example. You want taller ones in the back and shorter ones in the front to keep them all in sight. Also the grouping. Flower varieties within the beds are usually arranged informally, with curving rather than rigid borders between them. That's to maintain a natural, less structured look. And even in more formal gardens like this one, curves and circles are the norm, rather than straight lines and squares. Another important factor is the flower's time of bloom. Many flower all summer long, but others bloom either early or late. With proper planting, you can work your bed so there's always something blooming, either spring, summer, or fall.
So with all those factors in mind, we picked out several varieties for our main bed, brought them home, and got ready to plant them. But we didn't start digging right away. We went through kind of a dry run first.
All right, we started the planting process by laying the flowers out in the beds pretty much according to plan. They were still in the containers, but it gave us an idea of the spacing we needed, and it indicated what the flower garden would look like. You can think of this step as a final check of whether the flower combinations work together, especially the perennials, since they're pretty much permanent. If you've got a problem in layout, now's the time to correct it.
We're using flower transplants because of our shorter growing season. It's cheaper to plant flower seeds directly into your garden if the growing season's long enough, or you can buy the seeds early and give them a head start indoors. You can start a couple of months before it's warm enough to plant outdoors. Let's take a moment now to show you how that's done.
All right, there are a few things you'll need to get ready for your transplants. Seeds, potting soil, water, and some trays with covers. Now you can get potting soil at any nursery, and it's a good idea to mix it with vermiculite to keep the soil nice and loose around the new roots.
The mixing honors. Once the soil and vermiculite are well blended, you can fill up the containers and you're ready to plant.
There you go.
Just sprinkle the flower seeds over the soil, cover the seeds with a bit more soil, and sprinkle lightly with water. You want to label these for me, Dean?
Okay, I'm on it. Now you might have thought about this already, but it's a good idea to put only one type of flower seed in each container. This way you can keep them straight. It's also a good idea to label each tray so you know which is which.
Now, to keep the containers moist, we're going to put water into the bottom of this tray. Looks good. Then to keep the seeds warm and moist, we'll just cover the tray with this plastic lid.
Now just let them set a few days with the cover on. That should be enough time to let them start germinating.
But you finish labeling.
Okay? It'll take about a week for the seedlings to emerge from their shells and poke out through the surface. Then you can uncover them and expose them to the sun or a grow light. Keep them moist till they've grown 2 full sets of leaves. Then replant them to individual pots to give them more growing room. When it's warm enough to plant outside, set them outdoors a few hours a day for a week and increase that dosage each day. That gets them used to being outside.
You want to space the individual plants so they're about 24 inches apart. And if conditions are right, the flowers will grow together to form blocks in the garden. And you also want to stagger the plants so they don't all grow in perfect rows. Well, Dean, I'd say we have a garden here.
I think we're in real good shape. Tell you what, why don't we start with the perennials over there?
You got a deal.
I'll get our stuff.
Okay.
We're putting all the perennials in the back rows of our west garden, and we'll begin the planting with the phlox in the corner. It's best to start in the back and work toward the front so you don't have to step over flowers you've already planted.
Once you've decided where to plant your flowers, getting them into the ground isn't hard at all. Just dig down far enough for the plant's root ball.
and then stick the plant in upright. You want the plant soil to end up just below the surface of the garden soil. Then pack the dirt around the stem, and that's all there is to it.
This is the sunniest part of the bed, which is good because phlox likes a lot of sun. It grows about 36 inches tall and produces a beautiful white flower.
Planting perennials 2 feet apart may seem sparse at first, but they will grow together. After finishing the phlox, we work our way down the back row planting the other perennials. This is a shadier part of the garden, so we've chosen perennials that thrive on less sunlight, like bleeding heart. It produces small heart-shaped flowers in the spring, and it grows about 30 inches high, so we've got it in back. Next to that, we're planting another tall perennial called VERONICA. It gets up to 24 inches high. It blooms with small blue flowers from June to August.
We're also planting different varieties of hosta. It's known more for its leaves than the small flowers it produces in late summer. These hostas prefer the shade, which is why we're grouping them here where the trees and shrubs don't let much sun in. Hostas come in many sizes, and they fan out quite a bit as they mature, so we leave some space between the larger ones.
Now let's give you a quick idea of the other perennials we're planting. This is ASTILBE, another flower that likes the shade. It produces a red flower and grows to about 30 inches high. This type of MONARDA also adapts to a lightly shaded area, growing up to 40 inches high. We're planting 2 different varieties, which will produce scarlet and white flowers in midsummer. Virginia gets about 1 foot high, so we've placed it near the front in the shade. It doesn't like full sun. It blooms early with pink flowers, which have now faded, but the fleshy leaves are attractive the rest of the summer.
Back in the sunny area, we've got ACHILLEA, which really thrives in full sun. It grows about 3 feet high, so it's good in the back row, and it keeps its crown of white flowers most of the summer. Coreopsis also does well in full sun, as you might guess from its common name, baby sun. It grows to a height of about 20 inches, producing a golden flower later in the summer.
The late bloomers in our garden also include SEDUM, which puts out pinkish flowers in August that turn bronze in the autumn. We've got it in the sun, but it can adapt to light shade.
It's harder to characterize the chrysanthemums that we've chosen for our garden. That's because we're planting several varieties, and they get a lot of sun here. They come in every color except blue, and they vary in height from 1 to 4 feet.
With chrysanthemums, you'll get a bushier growth if you pinch off the blossoms as you plant. More will come later.
All the perennials are in now. We kept each variety in its own area, but not in any particular formal pattern like a circle or a square. To maintain an informal look throughout the beds, the clusters of flowers kind of snake together, yet maintain their own area.
We can now plant the annuals that we've chosen for the garden. Now you could start many annuals from seed, but we're using transplants to give ourselves a head start. And we'll begin with these geraniums.
We plant the annual transplants pretty much the same as we did the perennials, but since the annuals have only 1 season to grow, we're planting them closer together to help fill the garden in more quickly. We have both pink and white flowered varieties, and they'll get plenty of sun in this end of the garden.
The middle is shadier, so we're filling part of it with pink nicotiana, which is also called flowering tobacco. It grows between 1 foot and 2 feet high, and it can stand a little shade. We separate the transplants in each container and space them close for a full effect.
Next to them, we plant some more annuals that don't mind a little shade, pink and white petunias. They grow 8 to 15 inches high, and they're commonly grown at the edges of gardens, which is where we're putting them. In fact, we're putting all of our annuals along the front edge. They're shorter, so they won't block the taller perennials behind them. And year to year, it's easier for planting if the annual sections are out front and the perennials in the back.
Between our pink petunias and flowering tobacco, we planted this blue ageratum. It only grows about 6 inches high, so it's another favorite for growing along the edges.
Impatiens are also a popular choice in annual gardens. That's because of their fondness for the shade. They can thrive with almost no direct sunlight, which is rare among annuals. So, of course, we've got them in the shadiest part of the garden. These will grow between 8 and 10 inches high.
Coleus plants like the shade as well, but like the hosta, they're valued for their leaves, which come in many brightly colored patterns. Coleus does flower later in the season, but it's not very attractive, so you can just cut the blooms off as soon as they appear. Begonias have a more attractive flower, and they're also good in shady areas. They reach heights of around 6 to 8 inches. We're planting them next to some more geraniums at the end of our main garden and in the border around the porch.
All right, that about does it.
You're finished over there?
Yep, how are you doing?
Well, I've got just a couple left here.
Here, I'll help you out.
A light at the end of the tunnel.
See, this is looking good.
Yeah.
Really nice.
Yeah. Wouldn't want to count all these, though. Well, come on. Let's take a look and see what we've got here.
Okay.
Got the coleus and hostas. Those are looking okay.
Yeah.
Impatiens. Petunias.
Yeah, the bleeding heart.
Mm-hmm.
Monarda. ASTILBE. The daylilies, those are going to look real nice.
Ageratums. Oh, and my favorite, flowering tobacco.
You mean wilting flowering tobacco?
Yeah. You want to get some water?
Yeah. Okay, I'll grab some. I'll be right back. Hold on.
Make sure each of your new plants gets enough water. Keep the soil damp until they're all established in their new homes. That'll give them the best chance for a good start.
Boy, Dean, these are expensive this time of year, aren't they?
Oh, they aren't too bad. With all of our annuals and perennials planted, we were able to turn our attention to the roses. But before we get into that, a little background first. Here we go. Roses are grown on small shrubs, and you can get almost any color you want. In fact, there's an entire industry devoted to creating new rose varieties. And roses are hardy. Most can survive anywhere in North America.
But as with any plant, it all starts with good soil. So let's show you what we did to prepare our rose bed last spring. Why don't you roll them, Dean?
I'm on it.
You do have to take some care in the selection and preparation of a rose bed. For one thing, they require full sun, at least 6 to 8 hours of sunlight a day. And this is really the only area in our yard that satisfies that requirement.
So our first step is to lay out the shape for this new bed. And we want it to match up with the shape on the bed on the opposite side. And we also want to leave just a hint of a walkway to our neighbor's yard. So we're extending this bed a little bit, and we're going to round the edges so it'll match up with the west bed.
Okay, a little bit wider right here.
Yep.
This area is probably small enough we could have stripped all the grass off using a spade. But using this rented sod cutter that we have left over from the other beds makes the job a lot easier.
This existing bed still has some perennials and some bulbs growing in it, although the bulbs have already pretty much come and gone for the spring. We're digging up the bulbs so they won't get in the way of the roses. And we're going to transplant this perennial baby's breath to another part of the yard.
We'll be preparing this bed a bit differently than we did the other two beds for the annuals and perennials. Basically, we have to dig this one down quite a bit deeper.
Roses need the soil condition to a depth of 2 feet at least, and you need the soil to be well drained in order for roses to thrive. Well, clay soil doesn't drain well enough, and sandy soil drains too much, so you want the happy medium of loam. Sometimes you can tell what kind of soil you have by feeling it when it's wet. Sandy soil will feel gritty, and clay soil feels almost greasy. If you're not sure what kind of soil you have it tested at a soil testing lab.
Conditioning with organic matter can help correct drainage problems caused by clay and sand. But even well-drained loam soil can use some amendments when you're planting roses. And it's basically the same concept we described in the other beds, just with roses it requires a little bit more muscle.
That's because you should work the entire bed a full 2 feet deep. And you should add a layer of organic matter up to a 1/2 foot thick. about 25% of the soil depth you're working. One method is to remove temporarily the top foot of soil from the bed. You can lay it on plastic or plywood to protect the lawn.
The next step is to mix a layer of organic matter into the second foot of soil. We're using peat moss. The goal is to mix the soil and organic matter as thoroughly as possible. That gives roses the best chance to establish their roots. Okay, with this accomplished, now's a good time to handle any problems with the soil's pH. And of course, a soil test will indicate that. Roses like soil that's either slightly acidic or slightly alkaline. If your soil is too acidic, add lime. If it's too alkaline, add gypsum. Of course, you can get those at your local nurseries. Now, the next step is to fill in this hole with this dirt. You all set, Joanne?
Yep.
Let's go.
With the soil back in the bed, we can add more peat moss. And we're adding another kind of organic matter, bone meal, which hastens root growth and plant maturity. You can add fertilizer now, too. We're using an 8-12-4 fertilizer mixed especially for roses. Be sure to follow package directions closely on fertilizing because too much can hurt the roses.
For a good mix, you can use a tiller. It makes the soil soft and fluffy. In a large bed, this process can be a lot of work, but it saves you from trouble you might have later if your rose roots suffer from poor drainage.
Okay, tilling up the soil was the last step before we plant the roses, which we'll be getting to in a minute. But first, we want to describe the types of roses we'll be planting, hybrid teas and floribundas. Floribundas produce a shorter bush and several blooms per stem. They're known for color and fragrance. Hybrid tea roses are taller with just one large flower per stem, so they're valued as cut flowers.
Well, Jojo, I'd say we got just enough plants here.
Yeah, I think you're right.
That's good.
You can buy roses in several forms. These are called container roses or potted roses, and they're available later in the spring when the new growth is just beginning. In fact, some of these already have buds and blooms.
In early spring, roses are available in bare root or packaged form. That's without the soil ball and while the rose is still in its winter dormancy. However, potted plants like this are a little bit more expensive. For the first-time gardener, they're by far and away more convenient.
What we're doing now is pruning away some of the dead wood from last year's growth. You want to get rid of the brown wood and keep the green. You also want to keep your fingers from being stuck by the thorns, so wear gloves.
When you're looking for a potted rose, try to find one with at least 3 canes of new growth. Also try to find one with a sort of hollow area above the bud union. This provides for good airflow through the plant, and good ventilation will help roses grow their best.
To make sure the spacing's right, you should put the roses out in the beds about where you're going to plant them. We're putting the taller tea rose varieties in the back row, and we're keeping them 30 inches away from the hedge and about 30 inches from one another. Roses need a lot of elbow room.
We're putting the shorter floribundas up front. This way they'll be visible in front of the taller tea roses in the back. And we're spacing the floribundas about 24 inches apart. When you're planting roses from pots, you want the hole bigger than the pot itself. Figure it's 6 inches wider and 6 inches deeper. That gives the roots plenty of room to develop.
There you are, all set.
Thanks. We're adding a little bit of fertilizer to the bottom of each hole, mixing it in with the soil to give the roots a good start. Now this fertilizer is designed specifically for roses. Just read the back of the package to make sure you're not using too much.
You need to be careful of the roots and soil inside the rose pot. You can't just rip open the container and drop the soil ball into the hole like we did with the annuals and perennials. And that's because the rose will suffer if any part of the roots become damaged. So here's a way to protect them while planting. First, cut around the bottom of the pot with a utility knife and pull the bottom off. And careful with the soil here.
Then lay the pot in the hole you've dug. Now you can put a stick across the top of the hole to help position the pot. Basically, you want the rose's bud union level with the stick. That's where the canes meet the roots. Cover the bottom with enough soil to support the pot there, and slit the container from the bottom halfway up the side. Now keep adding soil to about halfway up the pot and press down to eliminate big air pockets.
Once you have dirt about halfway up on the pot, you can add a little bit of water around the edge. Now, if the soil in the pot is fairly wet, it isn't going to take very much. And it's just a matter of filling in soil up to the top of the rest of the pot and then pull out the rest of the plastic pot. And then just push soil in around the plant up to the bud union. You want the rose bush secure in the soil, so check to see how much play there is in the roots. If it sways too much, then just pack down the soil around it.
Once it's secure, we build up a dirt dike around the plant. And then to help the roses get established, we pour on a mixture of water and a chemical solution that's designed to ease the shock of planting. As you're planting, you'll notice a metal tag on each bush. It indicates the type of rose and which variety you've planted. You can leave it on to remind yourself of what you've planted.
Well, then we just went to put in the rest of the roses, right?
Yeah.
We're using the same techniques that we just showed, so I think we can skip over this part.
All right, let's move on to mulching.
Okay. With all the flowers planted and watered, it was time to move on to the mulch, which is basically any organic matter laid on top of the soil. And it's good for a couple of reasons. You ready, Joe?
Yeah.
Mulching can help prevent weeds and also preserve moisture. And if you use an organic mulch such as compost or grass clippings or leaves, it can be helpful to the soil because it eventually breaks down and then builds up the soil. Around these roses, we're going to use a layer of mulch that's 4 inches deep. We're using a combination of compost and dead leaves. Roses need a lot of water to thrive, and the mulch will reduce evaporation over the dry days of summer, so we won't have to water as much.
It helps to chop up things like dead leaves and a chipper when you're making mulch. What it does is speed up the breakdown of organic matter. You can buy compost or you can make your own. All it takes is some organic material, like grass clippings, leaves, or branches, and a place to let the compost ferment, like this compost bin. It's also a good idea to place it in the shade because composting can build up quite a bit of heat. To make compost, dump a first layer of material about 6 inches deep. You can add what's known as an inoculant to help the process. Fertilizer works, and there are products available with the bacteria and enzymes that get the composting process started. Now water each layer and keep building it up till you get to the top. And every week or so, stir it up to compost evenly and keep it moist. In a couple months or so, you'll have compost ready for the garden.
After mulching, we just left the garden alone for a while, except for watering, of course. Roses need at least 1 inch of water a week, and the other flowers could use it too. Now, about 10 days after you planted your roses, they're going to need some special attention, so I'll show you what we did.
Roses are susceptible to several diseases and insects, but there are products available that can help prevent them. We're using a liquid chemical that you dilute with water and then spray on the roses. And if you use a product like this, be sure to follow the directions. A sprayer helps you get the job done thoroughly. You want to coat all the leaves and canes with the solution for effective disease prevention. And figure on spraying the roses every 7 to 10 days during the spring and fall, or whenever the weather is wet or humid. That's when rose diseases are most prevalent. And be aware that chemicals like this can harm the environment, so follow package directions on disposing of them when you're done.
There are also natural products to protect your roses and flowers, and these too are mixed with water. For smaller areas, you can use pre-mixed bottles like these.
All right, you might say this was the end of the beginning. The flowers were planted, mulched, and sprayed. It was time just to let them grow, with a little fine-tuning.
The first blooms of your annuals will begin to fade a couple of weeks after you plant them, and you might begin to think that that's it for the year. But new buds will blossom and replace them. And there's a way to speed up the renewal on your annuals by pinching back the old blossoms. Well, these geranium blooms have begun to fade, so we'll pinch them back right now. Just take the faded bloom and follow the stem down to the junction with the main stem. Then with your fingernail, pinch through the stem and cut away the old blossom. That'll force new buds to blossom along the stem, making new branches and producing new flowers.
If you use this technique, your flowers will continue to bloom throughout the summer and tend to spread out in more of a lateral area. This technique also works well on petunias.
Got the right tape, Dean?
I've got it.
Okay. Well, as the summer wore on, it became pretty clear that some of our efforts were paying off, while others weren't. In fact, it was kind of disappointing.
We soon realized it was all because of slight miscalculation on our part. Let's jump ahead a month or so and we'll show you what we're talking about.
A lot of our flowers along the front row have really filled out nicely. However, the elm tree in the backyard here has given us a little more shade than we bargained for, and that's caused trouble for some of the flowers. For instance, the chrysanthemums haven't put out much more foliage than they had when we planted them 2 months ago.
Perennials do mature a little bit more slowly than annuals. It can take perennials a few years to mature entirely. An example here would be this ASTILBE. It's a little sparse the first year. Now there is a definite lack of sunshine in this yard. And here's another indication of that on this plant. The MONARDA is coated with a white powdery mildew. It's a condition that will develop on certain flowers that get too much moisture and not enough sun to dry it. You can protect flowers susceptible to mildew and other fungi by regular spraying with fungicide.
This looks pretty bad too. Actually, you can expect this kind of fade out from bleeding hearts. They bloom pretty early and then die off for the summer. They'll be back next year. In the meantime, we're going to put a little more color in this corner by transplanting these annuals. These are Nicotiana, and we're planting them in the same general area as the bleeding hearts. But we don't want to disturb the root clumps of the bleeding hearts. That's where the perennials will emerge next spring.
You can help overcome the impact that the lack of sun has on your garden with regular feedings of plant food. We're using a 15-30-15 plant food, and to a certain extent, it's helped trigger growth in areas of the garden where we've had little sun. Okay, I'll turn this on here. Our AGERATUM is filling in well with its velvety flowers. And the petunias are doing fine. Here the COLEUS are coming along nicely, as are the impatiens. These two annuals love the shade. This year they've swallowed up the hostas, which are perennials. But next year the hostas will be bigger, so we'll plant the annuals a little bit further away from the hostas. The geraniums and begonias have been producing blooms all summer long, yet they haven't bushed out quite the way we'd like. If you like a fuller look, you might plant them a little bit closer together. At the same time, when they do start bushing out, you might have to prune them a little bit to keep them from choking each other.
Our roses are doing extremely well. We were right about the amount of sun that hits this part of the yard. There's more than enough to keep these plants happy. And one of the advantages to growing roses is being able to cut off the individual blossoms and put them inside for display. And you can actually do this without harming the rose if you do it correctly. Now this is a tea rose, and you can see it's a single flower on a long stem. In the first year of its growth, you want to cut just below the bloom to promote continued growth. After the first year, you can cut the stems to be as long as you like. Just be sure to leave 2 5-leaf branches. That'll be enough to grow on. And for constant blooming, you should get rid of old blossoms before they fade. That'll prevent seed production and promote new growth.
All right, here's a couple I can clip. All right, there's 5 leaves, like that, and like so. And get rid of this one. Okay, go. One trick that growers will use to produce a very large flower is to clip side branches and buds on a stem. This way all the energy of the stem is directed up to the single bud. And to make your cut roses last longer in the vase, cut it in the bud stage. Just nip them before the bud begins to open, then put them in water right away. Just make sure you leave enough on the branch for new growth.
If you plant enough roses, you should have plenty of flowers to cut and display inside while still leaving a dramatic display outside in the garden.
Now we showed you how to start a new garden, but it takes a few years to develop, especially with perennials. So we visited a couple of yards to show you what a mature garden looks like.
Midsummer is typically when flowers will show off their true colors, and I think we hit this garden just in time.
There are quite a few trees and shrubs framing in the flowers. The annuals and perennials get plenty of sun, and obviously the excellent care and hard work have paid off.
Well, let's take a stroll through this floral oasis that's right in the middle of the city.
Let's go over here. We're moving on now to another garden. This one is dominated by annuals. Aren't these fantastic? Now remember, most of the flowers we're showing you in this yard, because they're annuals, have to be planted every year. The owner starts these himself in his basement in an area of about 8 square feet, using seeds that cost about $125.
In this bed, we've got fibrous begonias surrounded by dusty miller, blue ageratum, and lobelia. And this just goes to show you the kinds of effects you can get with mass plantings of different varieties. Now let's take a look at some of the other beds.
Well, that pretty much summarizes our flower gardening last summer. Pretty soon the cold weather arrived and the flowers started to die off.
But we did include some autumn blooms in our garden, which was real nice as we got ready for winter.
Well, at least the soil's still loose, Dean. These are pulling out nicely.
Yeah, they always come out a lot easier than they go in.
Yeah. We're cleaning out what's left of the dead flowers as we head into late autumn. And you can see that when it's over, it's really over. These used to be ageratum, but this is what they look like after the first frost.
Some plants actually thrive in this kind of weather. For example, our chrysanthemums and sedum are at their peak right now. The sedum is this particular type called an autumn joy, and it's blooming in a nice blood red color. And the chrysanthemums, they should have blooms on them until just about the snow flies.
After cleaning out the wilted flowers, we removed the finished compost from the bin we maintained, and we spread it over the garden soil to build up the organic content. Then we sprinkled on fertilizer to replace soil nutrients. And we turned the soil over to loosen it up for the winter. We stayed out of the perennial soil so we wouldn't disturb their roots. You don't normally think of fall as a time to be planting, but now's when we put in the bulbs for our daffodils and tulips that'll blossom next spring.
We're going to plant daffodils here between the perennials, which is fine because they'll bloom and fade long before the perennials come back. All we have to do is make sure we keep away from the roots of the perennials. When planting a bulb, you want to dig down the recommended distance for that particular bulb, usually somewhere between 4 to 8 inches. And then you want to dust in some bulb food on the bottom of the hole and mix that in real well, like so.
You have to be careful when you plant the bulb because you can get it upside down without realizing it. This side has to go up. You can see where the stem is beginning to emerge from the bulb. If you plant it upside down, the flower won't have a chance. And on this other side, you can see where the roots will emerge. After determining which side goes up, just pop it in the hole and cover it up. And then you want to water it thoroughly and just keep it moist until the ground freezes. That ought to do it.
The daffodils will be widely separated when they bloom next spring, but with the tulips we want to develop a different effect here. By planting them close together, we'll create a nice ring of solid color. We're digging one big trench here for all the tulip bulbs. By doing that, we'll save ourselves a little bit of time. Now, growers recommend that you plant tulips 4 to 6 inches down. We're going to go 8 inches. The tulips will still grow fine. Plus, once the tulips fade, we can still plant annuals on top of them.
We're also sprinkling some bone meal in on the bottom of the trench. This is a good food for the bulbs that we're about to plant. That ought to do it.
Let me get in here.
We're planting them 3 or 4 inches apart. 5 inches is recommended, but planting close together really makes the colors jump out, especially when you plant a lot. Bulb flowers come in many colors and in many sizes, and some will pop up early, whereas others will crop up a little later on in the spring. So keep these variables in mind when you plant.
And just remember to keep the bulbs moist until the ground freezes. Once that happens, cover the bulbs with mulch to maintain a constant temperature throughout the winter.
Our last job before wrapping up for the winter was burying the roses. I'm serious. It shelters them from the cold weather.
There are a variety of techniques for protecting roses in the winter, and we're using one called the Minnesota tip.
The idea is to dig a trench and then tip the rose bush into the trench and literally bury it with soil. It helps to water the plant a couple days before you do it.
The first step is to gather the canes in a bundle. Gloves will protect you from the thorns.
And then we want to wrap it up with a string, starting from the bottom and working around the top. Now, it's a good idea to use non-organic string so it doesn't rot at all during the winter. And then once you get to the top, you want to have about 2 feet left over so we can use that as a marking. Okay, that's all set. Then spray the plant with dormant oil. This will help kill any bugs that might gnaw at the plant during the winter.
Next, dig a trench that's as long as the rose and as deep as a shovel blade. And you'll save space if all your trenches go in the same direction.
Now, loosen the soil around the roots. Yeah, like so. There you go. And then you carefully tip the canes and guide them down into the trench. Okay, that's good there.
That's good. Yeah. And then cover the canes and the stems with the soil and break up any clumps to eliminate air pockets.
Yeah, this stuff's pretty broken up right here. And then just leave this part of the string exposed so you'll be able to find the rose bush come spring. Okay, we're done with this one. Let's move on. We're not trying to keep the roses from freezing. They can survive that without damage. The danger comes when they freeze and thaw over and over again. Thaws trigger growth in dormant buds, which then die if there's another freeze, and that's bad. We want our roses to freeze once and to stay frozen the whole winter. Keep the buried roses moist until the ground freezes. It's not good to let the canes dry out, and the extra moisture will help compact the soil, which better insulates it for winter. There we go.
Once the ground is frozen in a month or so, we'll come back and put down a layer of mulch that's about 12 or 18 inches thick. And believe it or not, leaf bags work well for this. They insulate the ground and protect the frozen roses from any sudden thaws. Of course, it's too early for these now. You do want to wait until the ground is frozen. And the reason is because rodents can get underneath the mulch and use it for cover and then burrow into the soil and nibble on your roses all winter. Not good. Now, if you have a lot of beds to cover like we do, you may not have enough leaves in your own yard that you can bag up. And if that's the case, just ask your neighbors for theirs. They usually don't mind and saves on space in landfills.
In the springtime, we'll just remove the mulch, and when the ground unthaws, we'll dig up the roses, prop them up, and they should be fine.
In the warmer climates, of course, roses don't need any winter protection. And in the middle zones, you really just need to cover them up with mulch or with soil. But you should really ask your local experts what's right in your area.
Well, that about wraps that up, huh?
Yeah, I'd say we had a good season.
This time of the year, about the only roses we'll find will come from a flower shop. But it won't be long before we're digging up our plants and getting them ready for the new season.
It'll be fun to see how those perennials turn out this year. We should try some different annuals.
That's not a bad idea. Well, we hope you've enjoyed the highlights of the first season of our flower garden.
And we hope that all the options we've shown you will help you with your own flower garden. For Home Time, I'm Joanne Liebler.
And I'm Dean Johnson. Thanks for watching.
Say, I got a new plan here.
Okay.
We're going to trim down that elm so we
That's a
can
good
reveal
idea.
more sun there.
There's a lot more sun over in this area, so those things.
Home Time is made possible by Chevy Truck, who brings you Chevy full-size pickups. Today's big pickups for professionals and do-it-yourselfers. Chevy S10 pickups, today's compact pickups that play as hard as they work. Chevy S10 Blazer, today's sport utility vehicle in 2- or 4-wheel drive. Chevy Astro, today's compact van with 2-wheel drive and new all-wheel drive models. Nobody's winning like the heartbeat of America. Today's truck is Chevrolet.
The National Home Time PBS series is brought to you weekly by Chevy Truck in conjunction with the Stanley Works.